Welcome everyone, Dr. Thor here. Get ready for Gnosis. Well, while this information may be a wee bit dated, there's some very important information about Jim and Tammy Bakker and the PTL club and the huge religious movement of that time. This had a massive impact on the American political system and what was going on. And it's very interesting to see the inner workings of the major television evangelists who were a big factor and on TV all the time in the 80s. And everybody knew about them. So, I mean, this was something that impacted everyone's lives to a degree. I don't know how many people watched all of that, but this was a big movement that was very popular, that was on all the cable networks, etc. And this was the movement who changed the conservative Christian movement, who changed American politics forever. And the inner workings of finding out who these people were. The Jimmy Swaggarts of the group. This guy who is rotten to the core, known for his horrible sexual problems, going after truck stop hookers, not only once, but on multiple occasions. And I'm assuming this never ended, then giving his fake apology. We go into Jerry Falwell, who was the main push to bring Christians into the Republican Party. Now, you got to remember that Republicans, or I should say Christians, before this, particularly born again type conservative Christians, were anti government, as they've always been, and rightfully so. Government is not a representation of what Christian values are. Well, that changed, and who changed that? Jerry Falwell. I'll go into that in this fascinating look into Jim and Tammy Bakker, which is nothing at all of what you think it is. The bottom line is that Jim Bakker was framed, and I believe that also there was a lot of people involved in this. Jerry Falwell was a big part of it. Jimmy Swaggart was, all these people, and what Bakker was charged with in this day and age is almost comical. The misuse of church funds and other things you got into is that, this guy was and he says it in his book here. And here's the book that he wrote in his own words, which is his life story. Jim Bakker's 84 now, and he has heart problems. He's not going to be around that much longer. He's left his mark and has always been very influential and has lots of supporters. I Was Wrong, the untold story of the shocking journey from a PTL power to prison and beyond. And he's been labeled as this terrible guy, which once you investigate all this, it's not. And everybody has labeled Tammy Faye as this wonderful woman who is kind of ignorant and stupid, which was really not the point at all. Not only was Jim Bakker framed, Tammy was quite a little bitch and caused the problems and the downfall. And I believe that she was manipulated, maybe even paid off. Now, I don't have any proof to this, but it's a very strange story. Now, I feel not only was this big at the time during my general adulthood, but I actually bumped into Tammy Faye on two different occasions in Palm Desert, California, where she lived in that same area, at Costco. And so, it's amazing how you bump into people and there's a little more significance because I've kind of bumped into her a couple of times. I was buying at that time a Brita water filter, the type you pour it in the top, and was putting it in my cart, and there was a display there, and she came up and said, well, are these good water filters? I said, well, they're okay. They're inexpensive, and they work fairly okay. And so I put it in my cart and walked away. She bought one as well. And I then saw her a month or two later in the same Costco. And she told me, well, I like that water filter, as we were standing, as we were in the store somewhere. So This certainly isn't knowing anybody, but it's amazing how you bump into different people depending on where you live, etc. And particularly if you're from Southern California and other areas, there are a lot of people or celebrities that live in these areas because they are very nice areas, and that's where a lot of activities are. But the Bakker family, her and Jim, had houses in Palm Springs for many years. And from my understand, she still has a house there. I don't know if it's been sold since her death a few years ago. Jim no longer goes there, as far as I understand. He is in Missouri, where he has his own Christian community. But he's been totally labeled, and I was under the same opinion that this is one of those huckster religious people. Now, it's just not true. Not only that, he was completely and totally framed by a really bunch of bad people. And what's significant about what I'm going to talk about here and go into many different parts of in the coming months is the fact of the kind of dirty, evil core of Christianity. And I think this should be noted. Because the bottom line is that not only was he framed, is that Jim Bakker was probably one of the few really true Christians out there who tried to do something in a very Christian manner and tried to do it correctly, while we have ministers now that are these prosperity ministers where he was criticized for having a few $1 million worth of stuff and a couple of fancy cars, while people now have 4 and 5 jets. Kenneth Copeland is worth, I believe, almost $180 million. There's no abuse going on there. There's no using church funds, all of this stuff. And it goes on and on with all these people. All of the noted Christian evangelists, even those that are so-called better than others, are worth tens of millions of dollars. So what happened to Jim Bakker was a lynching, a setup, because the bottom line is that people loved him. He was able to raise huge amounts of money, and he was able to take that money and get it going. The problem is with all things, and including the fact of not being a businessman that he wasn't, is that all this money was raised, but there's never enough money, and it didn't go to the right projects that it should go to, and all of that. And to try and micromanage it and do everything else, which you kind of have to do in life because you can't trust anybody, is the fact that you run into problems. You can't do it all yourself. You have to trust people, and that's always the problem because you can't trust anybody. So he was set up. He was betrayed. Tammy Faye was pretty much a nut job with all sorts of problems that she had, drug addictions and other things. She was very promiscuous, and there were all sorts of problems. And we'll go into the facts of this. And certainly the other incident, which really means nothing in the bigger picture. This was about taking down a very wealthy, influential person, because the people wanted the control of the Christian money, and that's the Swagerts, and that's the Falwells. He wanted control of that money to use him. And the plain and simple fact is they were highly jealous of a guy who raised, I believe, $450 million in a very short period of time and built a great place for Christians to go to. Now, whether there was, and there seems to be complete misunderstandings, they were supposed to build places where these donors could stay. This was highly delayed. Money, of course, was put into running the organization instead of that money being put aside to actually build things. So there were massive delays. And they tried to crucify him in the very typical way that they get everybody. And that's they got him on, or the dramatic part of it, because the court went after $2 million that was supposed to be used, $2 million, when you've got these other ministers that are worth hundreds of millions now. I mean, it's really comical the amount of money we're talking about, considering the kind of money these people make and the kind of abuses that we get from these people that are worth hundreds of millions of dollars, and all these prosperity preachers are. Now, when you try and do something like build a community and other things, and money's supposed to go in different areas, these can get very confusing. And when you raise a lot of money and you promise people that they have a timeshare and that doesn't manifest quickly, you have a lot of very angry people. And who were really the angry people? Well, it was Jimmy Swaggart, who got together people who donated to him to go after him legally, for criminally, etc. That's the kind of wonderful people you have as Christians. Same as Falwell and all the rest of these big Christian ministers that really are basically very evil people. And of course, what's interesting is when you look into the lives of these people as well, particularly how they operate business wise and their personal life. Certainly in Jim and Tammy Bakker, their lives were not touched in any positive way by the what should happen to so-called Christian people. Tammy had a horrible experience with all Christians since she was a child. And of course, she was a very, very unstable person. Everybody doesn't want to criticize her. Conveniently, she wasn't brought into criminal charges that she should have been brought into with the going ons at PTL as well, because she was the goofy little girl. And of course, that was the image she deliberately did, when behind that was a very sick individual and a very immoral individual who's having all sorts of affairs and everything else to keep up the good Christian operating realities. Well, Jim didn't have any of that. He was entrapped by a person after Tammy rejected him for long periods of time. He was, because she was having all these affairs, he had a plant come in there, bring in a professional basically prostitute claiming to be a church secretary. Now, Han did apparently work for some particular church somewhere, but she had the reputation of, like so many of these strange women have that are either chase people in military uniforms or police or other things. She had a thing for ministers, and everybody knew it. And she was very, very promiscuous. She basically, to use slang, was a slut who jumped on any preacher type that she could get, and she was well used in the Assembly of God Church. Now, she denies all this, saying that this man of God, this kind of milquetoast guy, who's never done anything in his life, would drug and rape her. This is ridiculous. These things aren't done casually. This is all nonsense. She demanded money very quickly. It was all a big scam to set him up, and she followed through and made sure she got a lot of money from it. So it's not about being traumatized, it's about getting money. And she made sure she got money and kept wanting more and more money, as blackmailers do. And the bottom line is why people pay them and why they get away with this. I thought blackmail was illegal, but they don't throw them in jail. They throw the people they're blackmailing in jail who really haven't done anything. So this is a very strange case that first looking into because of some indirect contact has turned into a mishmash of finding out really what, as I've always had a problem with any religions for that matter, is the fact of how really immoral and crooked and common they are. Their belief systems are not guiding them as a rudder of a ship. That rudder is broken and they're spinning around in circles, screaming basically bogus rhetoric. And they are just as worse, if not worse, than so-called other non-religious people. And this goes for all religions. There certainly is no high level of credibility or in any way honor and people acting in a particular way because of their religion. The Hare Krishnas are known for their child abuse. There's even talk of them having hit teams and other things. They manipulate and hurt people. That's been a large part of what they did, or they've been accused of. And we can go on and on. Certainly, the Jewish people in general aren't very generous. I mean, they are a very wealthy community of people. Known for their lawyers and doctors, and they certainly aren't honest. They're not any more honest than anything else, judges, etc. All of these things show that they're not very honest, and neither are anybody else. Certainly, we don't find, Jim Bakker was the Assembly of Gods. I had two employees that were involved in the church that Jim and Tammy were involved with, and Tammy used to go to all the time. They were scum. They support, and oddly, she even took Tammy's name. So, it just shows you how that church was linked to that. And I also knew their parents, these two employees, and they were rotten scum too. They supported criminal organizations that were against me, plain and simple. And they were too cowardice to say anything and everything else. And they were rotten people. This one guy of the church had three different children from three different women and didn't pay any child support. And she was happy with that because she wanted to have a baby and she wanted to make sure the money just went to her. So, I mean, that's the kind of immoral, common problems that happened. And because of the fact that the problems that he had is that he ended up not paying any of his bills or anything else. And I would get phone calls when he left my employment from all sorts of bill collectors because he wouldn't pay any of his bills. That's what he did instead of doing the honorable thing and, of course, keeping a good job that he had where he was well rewarded. Yeah. Steve and Tammy in the Assembly of Gods in Palm Desert. These are the scum of it. And, of course, their minister was a guy that was 400 pounds. So you can imagine the kind of church that is. And so was his wife. And, of course, so were Steve and Tammy. They were big, obese, fat people. I guess gluttony is not part of the 7 deadly sins or whatever they say. This is what you typically get. But, people are people. But when you look at any organization, you find how rotten the people are in it. So it's almost impossible to believe anything. And, of course, that's what turned me off to religions in general, is that how rotten the people were. They went in there to church meetings, and they would ignore you where you were in church. Then they would try and run you down when you tried to get out of church. They would be as rude as possible in the parking lot. So how can you deal with people that are that low level? But this is a story that really hasn't been told properly. And the behind the scenes of these very evil ministers who think they're doing the work of something, of God, is really the epitome of it. Jerry Falwell handled this entire situation horribly and really seems to be a total contrived put-up. They were all very jealous of Jim because everybody was sending money to him, and he built a great organization, and they didn't like it. They didn't like his preaching. They didn't like the fact that he has set up things that would be a place for Christians to go, and why not? Why not set that up? What's wrong with that? Why should any religion or any belief system be just mired in constant preaching and why not have shopping centers and theme parks and other things? Why not be a place where you can commune with other people of what you consider your own type? So why not? There's nothing wrong with that. And of course, that's what made him very popular and which brought him hundreds of millions of dollars. The problem is you got to be careful when you take a whole bunch of money and then are very slow to give the benefits to it. So people donated $1,000 and they were supposed to have a place where they could stay. And those facilities for the donors, which was not the hotel, by the way, which we are all lied to about. And of course, we're lied to about everything, aren't we? Well, if you don't think that, you should think that, because you're never going to be able to make a proper decision if you don't understand that everything told you is a lie. That was a hotel, and it was supposed to stay as a hotel. He was supposed to build facilities. You basically would call these timeshares, which were in the plans. And unfortunately, building stuff took a lot of money and a lot of time. And one of the problems is when you have a bunch of money and you have to keep things running, is that you tend to borrow the money that has been put over for one thing to use in another in the business. And that's exactly what happened. But he had plans to build all this stuff, but it would take probably years, and it was just a bad decision to go ahead and collect this money. And of course, from what I understand from his son, who did an interview recently, is that they needed about $2 million every 3 days to keep the organization running, including the network and everything else. So he got stuck in constant fundraising. And of course, you can't constantly be fundraising and take care of all the other things. Secondly, he is not a businessman, so you have to be very careful. So, and you can't do everything yourself. So, what happened is that he did the right thing by spending all of his time building PTL and Heritage Park there, I guess is what he called it, or Heritage Village, whatever it was. And of course, that means he had time for nothing else. Well, so, spoiled little brat Tammy didn't really like that. So the fact that he wasn't able to spend time with his family and everything else is very typical of a, and of course, she was an extremely insecure person. She was really, as far as I'm concerned, and of course, I'm not able to legally judge that, but she seems to be very mentally ill. She had serious mental problems. But a lot of people are like this. A lot of women resent successful men because they're not homo. Why do you think they're successful? It takes a huge amount of work and time that you have to spend away from it. Now, smart women make sure they get involved in what their husbands are doing and follow them, particularly actors and other things. So if you let your husband go away on a movie set for 3 months where you never show up, well, look what happened with Brad Pitt. You almost push them into that if you're not going to participate at a high level with them and be there for them. Maybe not every day, but unless you're showing up frequently, there's a problem. So she didn't do that. She wanted him to sit at home and while she knitted and I don't know, look at the fireplace or whatever. And this is something that she craved as the egotistical maniac that she was. Her mental problems of not being wanted as a child. It goes on and on and on, were all the things that further caused this. So instead of going to Jesus and asking for guidance and to bring them together, she found someone to have an affair with. So very typical. And not one person, but there were rumors of many, and we have confirmed others. And these things, of course, were really pathetic. She wasn't getting the attention she wanted, but of course, he wasn't getting it either. He wasn't getting any of it, and he wasn't screwing around. But after she rejected him and left him sexless for many, many months, he was then set up by a colleague of his, by this well-known, basically a person who had the fetish for, quote, ministers and other. And this is stated, of course, particularly in Tammy's book. She makes these statements about her and what was going on as well. And I tend to believe this. Again, what's proof? What is right? What's wrong? We don't know. You have to do your own investigation. But a good little church secretary doesn't go up to a hotel somewhere and meet somebody. How inappropriate that is. The hotel rooms are for basically for two things, sleeping and screwing. The bottom line is that's what they're there for. A hotel room is basically a room with a bed in it. And nothing more. So if somebody brings you to a hotel room or you go up to a hotel room, which happened with Mike Tyson, the girl he brought up to his room was at 12:30 at night from what I understand. What do you think you're going to, well, let's break out the Monopoly game. So the whole idea is that this was a complete and total setup, and there's a very nefarious background. And of course, Jessica Hahn was such a good Christian that she ran into the arms of Playboy, who then directed her life from that point on. So I tend to believe that entire story that she had a fetish for it. As I said, this is common. There are women that have fetishes, as I said, for military. It's common in the police department. And there are women that just go after Catholic priests. So, I mean, this is all certainly known. This is their personal sick fetish. And most of the time, Catholic priests are more than happy to indulge in that since they are forced to become celibate against anything of any kind of belief system. And certainly the supposed Jesus was certainly not celibate, being followed by bands of people. And as it says in the Bible, he loved John. Oh, you mean made love to John? Yeah. That's right in the Bible. And that's in the Greek translation in particular, where it's a little more definitive than what you hear. But that's neither here nor there in the bigger picture. So they've destroyed this guy's entire reputation. And then, to what they usually do here, the coup de grace of it is that, first of all, they set up what is generally slang called the honeypot setup, which is trapping somebody sexually. And then they bring up, which is just classic now, that there was homosexual things going on as well, and that Jim Bakker had homosexual tendencies and was actually involved in homosexual practices, which is highly unlikely, and I don't believe it for a second. Again, this was stated by this, I believe it was the same person who brought him to the room with Jessica Hahn to do that. And of course, this was deliberate and certainly against anything a Christian would do. This is basically something that is tantamount to prostitution, and certainly doesn't go with anything that Christians believe in terms of relationships. Now, Jim never had relationships with anybody else, and he spent a very short period of time, supposedly about 15 minutes, in that sexual encounter, and didn't really perform very well, but apparently he was able to perform because she was expert at it, because she was very promiscuous, plain and simple. So, being promiscuous, she was able to figure out how to take a nervous, stressed man and get him ready for intercourse. I tend to believe all of this. Now, Tammy says this in her book, and I'm trying to do as much reading here as possible to get both sides. So I'm reading Tammy's book, I'm reading his book, and I'm reading the dribble that was fed to the local Charlotte Observer, who printed all this information in their newspaper. And I have to really wonder why they would print stuff like this in such great detail. But, there's a lot of questions here of really what's going on with that newspaper and the influence that was going on with Falwell and with Swaggart. But it shows you the deep, dark underbelly, the filth, the evil that is within these ministers, and how they went after this guy who they were very jealous of, and in a classical, almost Werner and Lowe stage play way, such as the King Arthur stage play, Camelot stage play, of how this woman came in and betrayed her man and then brought down the empire. Now, that's the real story, and it was all facilitated by Tammy and her co-conspirators, which are all these religious people who are highly jealous of them, the Swaggarts, the Falwells, and there were other ones involved as well. So this was very engineered, because it was Falwell that grabbed all the money, and they were very upset about all this money going to basically Jim, who seemed to have been not politically aligned. He was more interested in building a great place for Christians to go and operate in a proper manner, while Falwell was using his influence, which he didn't have quite yet until he got a lot more money that was all going to Jim. He used that money to work for Republican causes, and he spent, I believe, $25 million or more, I don't know the exact figure, to bring out or turn the conservative Christian vote over to the Republicans and Ronald Reagan, which allowed them to win. So, that's the bottom line of it. But the other bottom line is they are highly jealous. Swaggart was highly jealous that this guy was raising all this money, and he didn't like anything about the ministry that Bakker put together. This is pretty horrific in general, but this is what we're talking about as the real actions of what's going on here. And when you look into this and you see the aspects of it, I'm going to cover all this, including the life and times of Jim himself and Tammy. Now, everybody thinks that this guy, and they continue to slander Jim with his more prophecies and selling food and other things to take care of yourself in difficult times, which, nobody has a problem with in general, but because he does it, they want to actually crucify him for it. The other thing with, he is 84 now. He does have heart problems, and the bottom line is that he's probably not going to be around that much longer. He has reset up a Christian community with housing and apartments and everything else. He's done a very good job there for people who want to be together with others, and I'm a strong believer of this. People should group together in not as a bizarre 1960 commune like a lot of people have in their mind, but people should group together in communities and live close to each other and everything else with the same viewpoints. This perpetrates good energies, and high levels of consciousness can be raised when you're with like-minded people. Controversy doesn't help you. Like-minded people can bring you to higher levels. So he was able to do that, and it's still going on, I believe. I don't know if it's Branson, Missouri, but he's in Missouri. He's set up a community. He has condos, homes, and other things. So he was able to pull off his dream in general. So this is very great. It's nice that he was able to do that, considering how persecuted he was. And it did come out in the end that somebody saved his butt, because they totally gave him 40 years in prison for virtually nothing. Now, the one problem that Jim had was the fact that he did like luxuries. He came from very poor, and of course, Tammy came from even poorer backgrounds. She had absolutely nothing. So the whole idea is that he did have, and of course, he never was paid properly. He never got any kind of money. Pat Robertson he worked for, and he never made any money. Paul Krause, all of them were very jealous of him, and he made virtually nothing with them. So oftentimes he was forced to use church money from these organizations to take care of things. Apparently, with Paul Krause, his home needed, which I believe was owned by the Krauses, by the way, needed a new water system, and he went and spent church money on it because he had to. He didn't have any money, and they weren't paying him a salary. So I'm not sure what church money is or not. Anybody who owns a business, it can be very speculative of what a business expense is or not. So it's hard to say that. What it is. So if you buy coffee for everybody in the office and donuts, is that a business expense? Well, it's food. So I mean, you can say it's not. A lot of companies offer food and different benefits. Is that deductible? So these are all things that we have to look at in the bigger picture of what's going on and what technically is deductible. So they got him on virtually nothing. Fortunately, they were able to overturn this because the judge, again, the filth that you get in the legal system and everything that goes with it, and he wasn't allowed to present his case properly. Very typical of what you get from judges. You can't go into court with what you want to state. You have to tell the judge that I'm going to show evidence for this, and this is what I want to present as my case, and they can say, well, I don't like that. I don't think that's relevant. No, that's not pertains to the case enough. You can't use that. Like what happened in the O.J. Simpson trial when they had two people in the same neighborhood who had their throats cut, that could not be entered into the law case. So these are the things that happened. And of course, this happened to him. And he was railroaded on every single way. Do I think that he raised $450 million. He took about $4 million out of the organization. I'm not sure, particularly in this day and age, that this is abusive in any way. So the whole idea is that should ministers be less monetarily based? He had a Rolls Royce. He had fancy houses and other things. Well, I don't agree with that. I think that people should be properly rewarded. But if you're truly into a spiritual life, opulence is not something you need. Living in poverty is ridiculous as well, or living super low key is not. People don't like to give money to people that appear to be poor. So the whole idea is having a certain high level of living. I understand, but does that mean millions of dollars? I don't know why he really needed to have a Rolls Royce, but he worked very hard. He put all his life and everything else into that. Did he reward that? Did he deserve that level of opulence? Well, we can all make a decision there. I think it appeared to be too much, but not really. This guy never made any money. Everybody screwed him over. Pat Robertson screwed him over. Paul Krause screwed him over. Falwell did. And he was under direct attack from very jealous Jimmy Swaggart. So it's really sad. But all this is going to come out. It's a fascinating story, but it shows you the kind of lack of integrity, lack of credibility of the entire Christian belief system and those major players in this particular area, and particularly what seems to be in the Assemblies of God, which all of these people seem to be members of. Very, very interesting. Lots to come. And really, this shows you how the system works, no matter whether it's a religious system or any other system out there, of how ultimately disgustingly bad people are. And Christians, I don't see any difference between a Christian and a Satanist in one iota. They're very corrupt and they're very bad people in general. And they've done nothing in 2,000 years of this supposed religion. But stay tuned for future chapters.